Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded session for Public Sector Insight Week. My name is Sean Donnelly and I'm the co-founder of the micro-donation app Ripples. And last summer we carried out over 50 hours of interviews and workshops with charity professionals to understand what was going on in the sector. And the most important question we asked people in the charity sector as part of that research project was, what is the biggest pain point in your job? And almost everybody said data or data issues. And this has led us very directly to building a whole new platform called CharityBI to help with these issues. The topic of today's session is, of course, data in the charity sector. And as it's pre-recorded, it's a slightly unusual format. We have stitched together a series of calls we had with fundraisers. We asked them the same questions, but if it appears to be a little bit disjointed at times, it's because they weren't necessarily always on the same call. We'll talk more about CharityBI and what we're building in the call, but effectively CharityBI is a platform that integrates with all of the third-party platforms that charities use to automatically import, clean and consolidate data into one simple view. But the charities we're speaking to talk primarily about the problems that they face with data in the sector, where it's been done really well, where it's been done not so well, and the reasons behind those issues. So at the very least, I hope that it's relatable. I hope it makes you realise that if you don't already, realise that data woes are very common in the sector, so you're definitely not alone. And hopefully you'll be very excited as we are about the difference that CharityBI can make to the sector. So before we get into it, just want to say a huge thank you to Suzanne, Peter and Michael for taking part. We're always blown away by the generosity of time in the sector, how willing charity professionals are to help others in the sector and people trying to improve things. So huge thanks to those three and everybody else who took part in our research project last year. It's been a fascinating journey and we hope that this small section of it will give you a good sense of kind of what we've picked up on the journey. So thanks again for tuning in. If you have any questions, you'll be able to ask them live at Public Sector Insight Week, but my contact details will be around as well on LinkedIn, email. We'd love to hear from you, hear your perspective on data issues facing the sector, and hopefully we can discuss how CharityBI might be able to help you very soon.
Okay, so Suzanne, if I can pass to you and you can introduce yourself for us, and then Peter, if you pick up from there, that would be great.
Hi, my name's Suzanne. I'm PR and Fundraising Officer at the Rossendale Trust, a charity based in Cheshire.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the Head of Fundraising and Communications at the Orpheus Centre based in Godstone.
I'm Michael Thelwall. I'm a fundraiser of sort of 20 odd years experience now. I've worked for a number of different charities, mostly small charities, but other charities like National Trust Kidney Research UK and the MND Association.
If we can just start by sharing your general thoughts and feelings about data in the charity sector, the good and the bad, if there's good.
I think we get a huge amount of data in the charity sector and it's not always managed effectively. Maybe that's due to time constraints and us all being so busy wearing different hats, but also because I think we get a lot of data from different sources. So it differs in maybe quality or the nature of the data that you get. And yeah, as I say, I think we get a lot of it. There's always a sort of balancing exercise, working out how to deal with it all effectively.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, so I find data in the charity sector generally. So there's a quantity issue in that very often we kind of collect data arbitrarily and we just have lots of it and without a strategic reason for having that data, just a kind of a hope that it's useful to know someone's shoe size maybe at some point. But it's also the lack of joined upness between maybe the CRM system and other systems that you rely on for marketing or for other activity. And so every single activity that you want to do requires a manual process. It requires people to think that through. And what what that sort of leads to is, like in my experience, is actually just stuff not happening. It doesn't lead to it happening badly or happening late. Actually, very often, if the challenge of solving a data problem is too big, you just kind of go, oh, we can't do that, so let's change our plans and do something that we can do. And yeah, as a head of fundraising, I find that frustrating, but I found that frustrating way back when I was an individual giving officer and, you know, just generating campaigns and completely unable to relate my campaign to a digital campaign that a colleague was designing at the same time. What a frustrating thing. And that, I think, in the for-profit sectors, that just you wouldn't stand for it. You would invest money to make sure that that wouldn't happen. Whereas charities have this sort of long-term, real backwards approach to investing in those fundamental systems. So those broken relationships between systems just never get looked at.
Okay, so
it's incredibly important to have accurate, quick data in the sector. Particularly as a fundraiser, which my experience is, without that quick, accurate data, you can't really plan how your income's going to phase out over the year. You can't develop those really important supporter journeys. And from a kind of service point of view, it can be really hard to demonstrate your impact. And yeah, more and more, we're seeing that supporters want to see the impact, and they want to break down that impact to, you know, in some cases, to the nth degree. I think as a charity, as a sector, we can be a little bit data shy at times.
Okay,
it's one of those things that can be sort of put off to the next day, and as we all know, tomorrow never really comes. But I think there are some areas that we're really good with data. I think, you know, like individual giving is just really run on data. And you wouldn't be able to get those insights that you need to have a successful individual giving campaign without having that data.
Yeah. Okay. And when you say that the sector can be a bit data shy, why do you think that is?
So I think it's, in some ways, it's not seen as a particularly vital aspect. You know, when you're sat down with a bunch of senior managers or trustees and they say, okay, where do you want to spend the money? It's far easier to get money for services or for fundraising or for marketing than it is to get it for a data team. Yeah. Because, you know, that, I don't think we're very good at expressing the message of how important data is. I think the other thing is, particularly for fundraisers, is if we're going to be completely honest, we're not about data. We're about developing relationships. We're about having those conversations. Yeah, I think having led a couple of fundraising teams and been on the fundraising, you know, sharp end of fundraising, I know that most fundraisers would much prefer to go and have a meeting than they would to sit in front of a CRM laboriously typing in different data and that's about a supporter.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, and this has come out in a couple of reports last year as well, is a kind of interconnected mix of cultural reasons, which might be kind of the internal buy-in and the strategy, and then there's also kind of more practical reasons to do with the tools, so things aren't joined up as much as you might like. Going a layer deeper, why do we think that is? Why do we think the cultural buy-in isn't there, if that's the case? And yeah, can we talk a bit about that? Perhaps you can start, Suzanne.
I think maybe it's because it doesn't affect a lot of people in the organisation. You know, that they look at maybe the you know, the fundraising team in the organisation, work on the data, bring in the funds, and they assume the data's being dealt with, and they don't see that background problem so much. You know, the money's coming in, the money's being raised, but maybe don't fully understand how, if we have more effective use of the data, or we could clean it up and be more strategic with the way we use it, how that could improve things. And I think it goes back to what Peter said then. It's a kind of time and an investment thing to show and to prove that is going to have its worth.
So you're in a bit of a catch-22, because you want it, the stakeholders need to see the difference it would make, but you need to invest in it to show that in the first place.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
What do you think, Peter?
Well, I think there's probably a number of issues that kind of culturally that make it difficult. I mean, firstly, fundraising is a mathematical delivery. You have to raise a certain amount of money, and you have to spend a certain amount of money, and so even fundraising leaders would sometimes struggle to see the value in investing in really good tech, because there isn't going to be a direct return. We all know that there will be a long-term return, but it's very hard to say to trustees, if you give me 100 grand, I will spend it. Oh, what are you going to get back? We'll all feel more comfortable. So I think there's that, and I think forever charities have been expected to keep their overheads as low as possible, which personally I feel is a backwards view, because we all know the likes of the big successful for-profit companies invest hugely in marketing and hugely in systems, and if charities were allowed ethically and culturally to do that, then we could have charities that are solving huge, humongous problems, competing with the likes of Amazon and Google for market space. But we're not allowed to do that culturally. Legally we can, but culturally it's just someone will look at our bottom line, they'll go, oh, they spend loads on overheads, we're not going to give our money to them, which is frustrating, and it's very, very hard to change that view. Slightly more like internally, I guess, in an organization, one reflection I have is that very often that the CRM system and all of the supporting systems always, or very often, sit within fundraising itself, and so because of what I've just said about ROI being a key kind of component of a fundraising function, you then all of your financial decisions are based on profit and based on return, whereas your service teams don't operate in the same way. They tell you what resource, they tell their managers and the leadership team what resource they need. We work out what we can afford to give them, and we give it to them, and they don't have to then make money back. The CRM system, if it didn't sit within fundraising as a cost, if it sat within a business need, a central business need, then I think people would be more willing to sort of not necessarily need to assign a return on investment to it that's direct, but that would be probably quite a step change for a lot of charities.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the impacts of kind of the data processes that you have in your charities and you've experienced in previous roles, what are the kind of short-term problems that are associated with the data issues, and what are the long-term sort of wider impacts?
I think short-term on a day-to-day, it's time consuming. It doesn't, we feel, I think you can be lulled into a sense that you've got all this data and it's amazing, but actually when you do get the time to sit down and review it, it isn't offering you what you want from it.
I think that time-consuming issue is quite a big one, and so I mean, for example, if a member of staff has to physically do a manual thing every time you want to reconcile finances with the finance tool or run an email campaign, there's obviously the very short-term implications of that takes up their time, but not that long-term implications of actually then there's a sort of these single points of failure where there's a staff member that knows that process, and yes, it's probably written down on a piece of paper, but actually when that staff member leaves, there's this like, well, who's going to run the gift aid report? Who's going to do this? Whereas actually, when you automate those things, you create a real safety in that. So the longer term implication of that is actually staff turnover doesn't impact your business in the same way, and not just staff turnover, but when people's roles change or evolve, or when your fundraising strategy maybe evolves and changes.
Yep.
If you were in the habit of creating an automated process for as much of that as possible, you leave people to just have headspace for the actual thing that they're experienced with, which is fundraising. So the longer term impact is actually, you blind people, you take away their headspace and their time, where actually they might otherwise just sit back and think, okay, well, what campaigns have gone well, what would I like to do, and kind of aspirational and creative time just gets sucked away with admin that is always you can't do it, you can't switch off and do it, you can't just go through, you have to be concentrating, and it's draining and it's time consuming. So it's quite a lot of impact, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's what you said earlier is really interesting about things just not being done, and I guess it's what you've touched on there is kind of sucking out the creativity and the enthusiasm, because you just settle for something that you've done before instead of putting together brilliant supporter journey. I mean, is that something that you can relate to, Suzanne?
Completely, yeah. I mean, we're all in this job because we like to think we are creative, and we love coming up with new ideas and innovative ways of challenging ourselves and getting our stories out there and increasing our fundraising. And admin's dull. It's dull, and it really stifles that in you. And when you're in a small organization like ours, it very much falls to one person, and I think it is because everyone just walk away from that, don't want anything to do with that. That's the really boring part of the job. So you then don't have that extra input either, into how to best to deal with it, and like you say, you do settle for what's worked, until you give yourself a little kick and say, right, come on, let's sort this out this week and let's try something new.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. And you touched upon, on the first question, you mentioned sort of the why data is important to charities and why having good data processes are important. On the flip side, what are the kind of negative? So you mentioned that the numbers aren't ready for that particular meeting because somebody hasn't provided the time to prepare them. What are the wider impacts of that? What's the downside of having poor data processes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The downside really is that it's a lot harder to plan your campaigns. It's a lot harder to be agile. So, for example, if you've got a mass participation campaign and you're saying, okay, I need to get to X amount of money, which means that I need to have X amount of people signed up.
Yeah.
You need to be able to see that on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. Because if you don't, then you're going to be reacting far too slowly, and your marketing isn't going to be doing the job you need it to be. And you don't know if you need to put in more budget, you don't know if you need to pull the budget, etc. The other thing for a lot of major donors, trusts and foundations, corporates, that kind of stuff, it's incredibly important to be on top of those relationships, understanding what they're giving, when they're giving, and why they're giving. Without that, you can't develop your relationship. And quite simply, you will lose supporters. And if you lose supporters, you obviously lose money. And then finally, I think the other impact of not having a good database and good, accurate CRM is you don't know where you're going to be in the long term. So you can't do that long-term phased income planning that all of us fundraisers absolutely rely on. If you don't have that, then you have a really ineffective fundraising team who are fighting fires rather than acting in a tactical or strategic manner.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting, that final point, because this idea of constantly fighting fires instead of being a bit more strategic and thinking long term, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Because this is kind of getting to the root of it, you know, not fixing this process because you're busy fighting other fires, and it's just a never-ending cycle. So that's a really interesting insight. Okay, let's talk about CRMs. Obviously, a hot topic in the charity sector. I think that in our research project, when data kept coming up as an issue, our natural instinct was to think, well, CRM should surely be solving this. And I know that, Pete, you've had some experience where it's been great and you kind of automated some things, but just generally, where have you seen it done well, if you have? And if CRMs aren't solving it, why aren't they?
I think CRMs are solving it in my experience, and I've got, I suppose, limited experience of CRMs, only having really worked with one, but solving it to a small degree in that they recognise some of the external platforms, the ones they choose to recognise. They don't seem to be open to, recognising everything out there. And I think it's probably been exacerbated more over the last few years with the increase in digital fundraising and the way things have gone and all the new ideas that are out there, to get that kind of new generation of supporters. And they've just not moved with the times. It feels, they're not recognising that we've got so many sources of information coming in that we need a resolution to that problem.
Yeah. Just so I'm clear, could you repeat the question, Sean? Sorry.
It was if so, with all of the kind of data sources that we have nowadays, it feels like CRMs could perhaps solve this, and it's just a question of why hasn't it been done? Why aren't they all integrated already? And where you've seen CRMs working really well, because I know that some charities we've spoken to have built automations and it is working very well. How long that will last remains to be seen, because they need to be maintained. But just your thoughts around that, really.
Yeah, I think the rise of digital marketing over the last it really is more recent times, but obviously since the dawn of digital marketing, I think digital unlocks a huge number of routes to market. Whereas when you think of traditional media, a letter is a letter. Whereas when you then go to digital, there's so many channels within digital that it's actually a big network. It's a really big network. And somebody who's not an experienced digital fundraiser will think of digital as a channel, whereas digital is maybe 15 different channels that you can use.
Yeah.
And so that then creates, maybe with that lack of understanding, it creates a lack of investment in setting up for a proper digital portfolio.
So there's really two questions there. So are all charities using CRMs? And the answer to that is definitely no. Mm-hmm. And then the other question is around why aren't CRMs working? Mm-hmm. So, not all charities use CRMs, and there's some of them are really good. There's a really good reason for that, in that some charities just aren't mature enough to have a CRM, and that's absolutely fine. But the issue there is when a charity does become mature enough for a CRM, and they're either holding data on one massive spreadsheet, or they're holding data on lots of different spreadsheets that have been set up in lots of different ways, that use lots of different headings for the same information. And then it is an absolute nightmare getting all of that stuff onto a CRM in a quick and efficient manner.
Sure.
Having tried to do it a couple of times, I know that it can be, it can take literally weeks to get it done, either taking away valuable paid time or even volunteer time. And volunteers are not going to be terribly excited to do it, because it's not going to increase their employability chances, and it's not going to be exciting for them.
Mm-hmm.
The reason, one of the reasons that CRMs don't work for charities, in a sense, is that a lot of charities don't have a clear data strategy, and without a clear data strategy, most of those CRM policies and procedures are built in a very organic way.
Mm.
That leads to duplication. It leads to people putting on different information in different ways. It leads to different uses of CRMs, which then means that getting the information out is almost impossible.
Yeah,
It's it becomes a real struggle to merge records or to find out everybody who's given £10 over the last month, because people have recorded that £10 in different ways.
mm-hmm. So interesting. So without a clear data strategy and direction, everybody figures out their own ways of working and importing and handling data, which makes it all a bit kind of disjointed, and when you want it, it makes it less useful then because nobody understands it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some inherent problems with CRMs as well. Some of the CRMs I've used have been incredibly logical to the point where they've taken out all sort of human intuition, which then makes creating reports almost impossible. There's been other CRMs that I've worked with where there's 3 different ways of doing the same thing, which obviously leads to problems. And then other CRMs are incredibly powerful, but they hide their power. So, different aspects like trying to gauge how many people are on an event can be really difficult.
Yeah. So to kind of almost too powerful or too bespoke, would you say, or? Or is it an issue of complexity?
I think it's an issue of complexity and too bespoke as well. Because as a fundraiser moving from charity to charity, you spend, particularly at the start of your career, you spend 2 years in a role getting used to how a certain CRM works and how a certain charity does that data recording piece. You then move over to another charity and you have to spend sort of 2 more years developing knowledge of how the next charity records things. And senior managers will come in, they'll stay for 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and they will say, right, I'm going to do it like this, and everybody should do it like this. And then the next person comes in and they go, I'm going to do it slightly differently. And so you have to change all of your processes again.
That makes sense. In your charities at the moment, can you talk a little bit about your data import processes, sort of the nitty-gritty?
Yes, so some of ours is automatic. Our CRM does have some automatic imports. We've got a lot of manual. I've just had one today, actually. Someone set up a fundraising page on a platform we've never used. I've had notice that some money's coming in and I'm going off on leave. And there won't be anyone here to deal with it next week. So I've left a few notes on that one. But we as a small organisation have lots of small parts, so maybe it's not something we're doing every single day, but in some respects that's harder because we're just getting one-off payments here and there and sort of going through reports which all look completely different, giving you different information. And then obviously once you've manually imported it, it's how you use it. It's making sure it's all clean, that every file has got the same information in so that you are pulling off the right reports, whether that be for your next campaign or your next email shot, or whether it's reporting back to trustees on what's worked and what hasn't. But yeah, it's tricky. It's a tricky balance, and it requires discipline, I think. Make sure you do set yourself that time to do those tasks that might not be top of your list because they're not quite as exciting as organising your next running event or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think it's a really interesting point on the context switching. If you just have to keep coming back to it, you know, maybe once or twice a day, that's inevitably going to take more time than if you were just setting half a day a week. How often do you think that your charity spends a week, Suzanne, or in your role on this data admin when it all adds up?
I would say probably about, I mean, it differs from day to day just because of the size of our organisation. But I suppose my best kind of guess would be maybe a quarter of my kind of working time over the month.
Yep.
You know, some days are more intense than others, and that they're usually the days when we try and collaborate with our finance department to make sure that they've got the same as we have.
Okay, and Peter?
Yeah, so I mean, just going back to the earlier question, I think we probably, there's maybe 10 to 15 different routes that donations can come in, and I think that's part of the issue for charities. Is it's important that we're on these platforms so that our donors can find us in the way that they're used to giving. But then for smaller charities like mine, and sounds like yours as well, Suzanne, that means the same amount of admin but for lots fewer donations. So a lot of those processes are sort of semi-automated, where maybe there's an upload template, but it's still a manual process, really. And some of those are much more manual. And again, that's just through, it's not been worth automating the process. Perhaps the volume is so low that it really is. Well, I still think in the long term it's worth it, but actually it's hard to, if you can do the manual job in half an hour and it would take 4 days to create an automated process, then you'll just keep doing that half an hour and then eventually you've lost months. But we have a 2 days a week database admin, and so her role is purely to support the rest of the fundraising team to find the data they need, to upload and download data, to help reconcile the CRM with the finance tool. So yeah, two days a week is what that person spends. But then the rest of the fundraising team also have their own small bits of admin here and there, and we have a fundraising assistant who's also 2 days a week who commits a good chunk of her time as well to supporting that. So yeah, probably the minimum would be 2 days a week. It could push to 3 days a week for busy periods.
Sure.
So there's different ways of data importing. The quickest and the easiest is data upload, bulk upload. Using a fundraising platform like Just Giving, downloading a report in Excel or a CSV file, and then uploading it into your CRM. And that works really well if you've got a piece of software, a bit like CharityBI, that helps that process work, and if you've got the right titles on your columns. So if Just Giving titles refer nicely to your CRM titles, then that works completely well. But if you have a CRM that says, a person will be known by their Christian name, and a platform that says a person will be known by their given name, then you've got a bit of a problem there.
And just going deeper on that, well, 2 questions. One is, how often would that happen in the example of Just Giving? So how often would somebody go in and download and upload? And if you don't have titles that match very well to the CRM, what happens at that point?
So how often? So Just Giving, for example, give every 2 weeks. So they transfer money over every 2 weeks, or what's the last time I was involved with it. And there is also a separate report for Gift Aid. Now, it will take, or it has taken, a couple of hours for somebody to download that report on a Monday morning, upload it onto CRM, and then crunch the data to look at it. And that has sometimes been because of the titling issue. So once a week, you know, you're spending a Monday morning effectively going through those details and crunching the data to get some kind of idea of where your latest mass participation event is.
Yeah.
There were several occasions where I would meet other heads of to discuss fundraising updates and progress on different campaigns. And I would say, okay, what sort of numbers? And the head of data, or IT as it was, I think, would say, well, we haven't got them yet, which would make that meeting really quite difficult, because we're not sure of what we're talking about.
Sure. And do you think that issue of not having the data ready is symptomatic of somebody not going in and doing a manual process from the data team, or not having the time to? So when they don't have the data there ready for that meeting, what are the causes?
I think it's simply time, the amount of time it takes to put that data from the download into the CRM and into that number format that you want to see as a fundraiser. I think it's particularly difficult if it's you obviously want to start your week as a fundraiser knowing where all your campaigns are.
Yeah.
Other people have different starts to the week.
Different priority.
Yeah, so it's a priority and time thing.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. Well, as you know, as a direct kind of result of this research project that we've undertaken and feedback from yourselves and others, we are building a platform called CharityBI, which we believe will be really valuable for this problem and help to alleviate a lot of the kind of impacts that we've discussed. And CharityBI is a platform that is effectively a suite of integrations that exists to move data automatically from all of the third parties that charities use and bring that data into the CRM on a kind of a real-time basis. If a charity doesn't use their CRM, or they're not happy with it, or they don't have a CRM, they can also view all of the data in CharityBI, but it will also push that data out to any of the existing CRMs. So when we launch CharityBI and all of the integrations are there for your charity, how will it change your roles and things at your organization?
I think it will streamline the process a lot more. It will give us a source, I think, that we can trust, where all the data is uniform. So it's pulling out the same data from each of the external sources that we require. It will clearly save time on the admin side of things, and definitely make our kind of collaboration with finance much easier to support. Yeah, I think that, but from kind of a personal point of view, I think making the data more uniform and more usable is one of the biggest advantages that I see, because it gives us so many more options for focusing campaigns going forward.
Just realised I was on mute and couldn't find the mute button. Classic 2023. Yeah, I think so I was involved in some of the earlier discussions about this, and I have to say, I think I even said this at the time. I was kind of like, I don't really believe that it's possible, because in the few CRM migration and configuration projects I've been involved with, it's almost always been individual APIs that have to either be manually built, or sometimes there's an off-the-shelf thing that has to still be, in a way, kind of configured and set up. And very, very rarely have I had the skills within the team to do that. So we've always had to use a consultant or a freelance third party. So the idea of there being like a one-stop, this will clean your data and bring it in from kind of anywhere where it's expected. Like, I still don't quite believe that it could be real.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too good to be true.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge that we have with CharityBI. We've got the team capable of doing it. I think, to touch on kind of something you said earlier, Peter, that it's almost, if it was for the private sector, you'd believe it was possible, because technically a lot more difficult things are pulled off. There will be a degree of configuration required still, but the plan is for it to be minimal, and with every platform you add, it will be less and less each time, because you have done some of the configuration already. But so if you just come along for the ride for a minute and believe that we're going to pull it off, how will it change things at the Orpheus Centre, and what maybe in terms of different departments and different impacts, what would change?
Well, I think so I'm only recently joined as the head of fundraising here, and we're also approaching a really significant potential development on site. So there will be a big capital appeal to support that. So one of the things that we need to be really, really good at is working together as a team, because what we can't do is throw money at loads of new staff. We actually need to be kind of working together. And the biggest hindrance to that is usually the corporate partnerships officer hasn't updated a relationship status or hasn't put the latest comms, and then that person then calls the community fundraiser and says, oh, we'd like to do a challenge event for you, and they can't find the information, so no conversation can take place. Then you have to kind of go, oh, hold on, let me go and talk to them and I'll find out where we're at and what have you. So I think it will increase that ability to just to be reliant on the data that you see, and that reliance on the data will I think it will give people real confidence to actually just to just make those have those conversations there and then, without having to put everything off and make everything a much bigger thing. It usually sort of then sparks, oh, I need to upload that report, and actually if that I need to upload that report is if I never hear that again in a conversation about what are we doing, what's our fundraising activity, I will be so happy, and it would increase that smooth day-to-day running.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they're kind of, especially in larger charities, something we heard a lot was kind of this cross-departmental thing, and it's trust as well. So can we contact Joe Blogs because we don't know if another team, if individual giving have contacted them already, or if events have got them involved in something, they just don't have that visibility. And I imagine it happens at your organisations to a lesser extent, but it's still kind of there. And what you just described, Peter, is kind of really interesting in terms of, it's very hard to quantify, isn't it? These little issues that you face. But it's hard to kind of get tangible numbers to these things.
Well, that's why it's sometimes hard to justify it as well. If your entire fundraising team doesn't know any better and has never worked where those systems are working, actually half the battle is the trustees and the funding to do it in the first place. The other half is actually convincing fundraisers that it really will make a big difference. As long as they're good at keeping databases up to date and all of that, it's helping them to understand how much easier their job would be. And sometimes people get that really quickly, and sometimes it's actually a real challenge to help people understand that in the long term it will be really beneficial.
Well, the hurdle from here, there's only two. We're a fundraising team of two, so it's all in our heads. And it's that, as you were saying before, Sean, if something happens to one of us, we have an ill day, we can't come in, it's all in our heads. And most days that works fine because we're sat next to each other and we can swap those ideas. But it's to have that information there so that we can give those reports and we can look at progression. When I first came to this charity 7 years ago, we were still working off an Excel spreadsheet for sending out emails, and it was from my previous background, which wasn't in fundraising, where I'd worked with CRMs, that I was able to show what CRM could do and how I could work with one that the charity were already paying for. So I'm confident that we've made steps there already, and we've convinced people that that there are benefits to having these systems in place, and now we've got something which can take us even further potentially. Hopefully.
I mean, I think to add to that, I think it's that sort of inaction and being part of these things. If we can just remove the need to act and just get to the exciting stuff more quickly, then that's going to obviously help with the kind of cultural change and the buy-in, because those kind of boring tasks that people have to do every week just won't be there. You can pull them off. But
so there's a couple of different ways that it would really help us. So first of all, and I suppose in the legal sense, most importantly, it would really help the end of year process. You will have all of your files, you will have leads and paper trails for all of your donations. So when the auditors come in and they say, right, go and find me this donation, you can go to your CRM, you can go, right, it's here, and here's the paper trail to go with it.
What might happen in that world if you didn't have the platform situation?
For anybody who's ever gone through a end of year, you will know that it is a absolute nightmare of a time, particularly if the auditors say, I want to find this piece, this piece of work with this donation. Where's the donation coming from? Where's it going to? And you can't find that paper trail, then it is really a time for sleepless nights and firefighting and taking your eye off the fundraising board. You're not getting the money in. You're trying to sort out where the money has gone to. It can take, for a smaller charity, it can take 2 weeks. And it can take 2 weeks of the fundraiser's time or head of fundraising time to get it sorted. Not solely on that, but the majority of those 2 weeks would be on that.
Sure.
So I mean, that's the impact. You literally lose that amount of time, and you also have the problem that your auditors start to dig a little bit deeper. Which can then take more time, and it can mean that you're late on your charity commission work. Sorry, I went off on the...
I cut you off there because I was intrigued on the flip side, but the original question was just sort of how would the platform impact upon your role and the wider charity?
So the other impact that it would have is around timing. It would allow me to see exactly how well each of my fundraisers were doing in their work to develop different fundraising activities, different proposals to supporters. It would allow me to gauge where we were on a campaign very quickly. It would allow me to give that accurate data. And sometimes, that having that at least once a day or as in real time as possible is incredibly important, particularly when you're going through social media. If you've got a campaign that has been advertised through social media, you want to see literally down to the minute how many sign-ups you've got, so you can get those fundraising packs out to people as soon as possible. Because the great thing about social media is you can reach so many people. The bad thing about social media is everybody else can reach so many people, and people tend to forget you. So you really have to be on top of your game when it comes to getting the support stuff out. And that's the other thing about using using CharityBI. To really enhance your CRM. All of the work that fundraisers do around developing supporter journeys, around gaining insights in terms of their supporters' habits, can be really accelerated using the software. And that's only a good thing, because supporters are getting less and less sticky at the moment. They're moving between charity to charity quite a lot faster than we used to. So anything to really increase that supporter lifespan can only be a benefit to the charity.
We're out of time. I'm conscious that we're overrunning slightly. I'd just like to kind of close off by asking what you think the challenges will be of implementing something like CharityBI at your organisations.
I think the things we've already touched on, really, making people aware of what our challenges are on a daily basis, and how the investment is worthwhile. it's not, as Peter was saying, going to generate a sudden upsurge in fundraising, but it's going to enable us to divert our time elsewhere. It's going to enable us to focus on what we really want to be doing, and it's going to be enable us to be a lot more effective in what we do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that could make it difficult, but if there's a nice clear like pricing structure and it can suit smaller charities as well as larger charities, I think that will probably have one of the best impacts. Because that's really what trustees ask is, well, how much is it going to cost us, and is it fair, is it reasonable? But yeah, in terms of like the more day-to-day, I think having some effective demos available and being able to really show like real live scenarios, this is what it could do for you, that will help people like me make a really clear decision and be able to show my team and say, actually, you know, this really will help. It's not just this is not a gimmick. This is not another thing to throw money at to see if we can solve this problem. But I think charities can help themselves, like in the meantime as well, and actually, you know, increasing the education around what data is for, as Suzanne says, and why it's important to maintain it and keep it up to date. Actually, you know, manual systems are not sustainable in large scale, but if you're really good with data and everybody is treating data with the respect it deserves, you can still get a lot out of a very basic tech setup. But I think it's where volume and scale, that's what then starts making that, you know, you can't just always do a manual process when scale starts increasing.
Yeah, agreed.
The technical side of things is an interesting challenge that I think just about all charities have. I've never had a charity that hasn't had this challenge. A lot of charities, or you hear, if you speak to a lot of fundraisers, they will complain that the technology that charities use is not cutting edge. It's some years behind, and you know, people take the mick out of local government for using old technology, but I think charities are sometimes guilty of being worse than local government. So I think one of the challenges is just literally that commitment to technology, and to make sure that every charity has the tools that it needs. In terms of the cultural side of things, I think we've already kind of touched on that. You know, there's this in fundraising, I think there's this understanding that, you know, it's really important to have the data, and it's really important to have good data that you can rely on, but at the same time you've got a lot of desire to actually go out and have the next meeting, go out and talk to the next supporter, take that phone call. And sometimes you can get pressure to say, okay, it's great that you're doing all of this data work, but look, we need to get the supporters in. We need you to go and develop those next relationships.
Yeah.
And then I think finally, it's really talking about the benefits of using a system like this. Without a system like this, you are going to slow down, you are going to be less efficient, things aren't going to go missing. But creating that compelling case to go to your senior managers or your senior leadership team and your trustees to say, please don't spend the money on doing this in fundraising or producing this wonderful service. Please use it so we can be more effective. And that comes back to the fact that a lot of charities are very cautious about where they spend their money, because we are absolutely held to account for every penny that we spend.
Yeah, it's really interesting trying to get the powers that be to focus on not even long term but medium term as opposed to the immediate things that they know, where the feedback loop is much shorter. You can see that you've done this campaign and spent resource on this campaign, and it's delivered this back, versus something where you might not really see the impact for kind of 6 months or longer. Can you think of any examples where that kind of attitude to do what we've always done well and fight fires has been overcome, and like trustees or senior leadership have focused on something that's a bit more kind of medium to long term, and how was it done?
Yeah, I think this really depends on the trustees. Yeah, it's getting that understanding of efficiencies within the trustee body, so the trustees can say, yeah, that's a really good idea, and that's something that we ought to concentrate on. It's I tend to find that those trustees that have come from a data or a business side actually understand and appreciate why it's needed. And I think there's a point in every charity's fundraising team where that fundraising team says, okay, we can no longer fight fires, we've got to think about this more strategically. Fundraising burnout is a major thing in the charity world, as I'm sure everybody will know. So just having that more strategic viewpoint can stop or can reduce the impact of the burnout. And once that's been taken on board by senior leadership, then they do buy into these ways of making life a hell of a lot more easy.
Yeah, I love that. Agreed. Final question. From our perspective, for anybody watching, we'd love you to go and check out CharityBI. But outside of that, what are your kind of top tips or recommendations for having good data and good data processes in charities? Where have you seen it work well, and what's been the reasons behind that?
I think top tip from me would be make sure you set yourself time aside to focus on your data. Put that time in your calendar. Don't put it off. It's very easy to, but don't put it off. Sit down, spend the time working through it, because it will reap rewards at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think there's lots of things I could say, but the one I'm going to go with is find yourself a database stickler. Get someone in the organization that is really passionate about data and really rude to you when you don't get it right, because actually, but in the nicest way, if you've got someone that's really always advocating for correct quality and everything, and timely uploads, and making sure it's like that. Generally, if you tell everybody that it's all of their responsibility, when you've got a larger team, that really means it's nobody's responsibility.
Yeah, so true.
So it's important, I think, to have somebody who is there to in the nicest possible way, crack the whip and be a real advocate for CRM data integrity.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, accountability is huge, definitely.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said right at the beginning, which is make sure you've got a really good data strategy. And make sure that if you are at that stage where you're not ready for a CRM, but you're thinking of having a CRM, have a look at your own systems at the moment. See what can be done to simplify them, see what can be done to make sure that they are going to be CRM ready, and always remember that you only have one shot at setting up a CRM for the first time. So make sure that all of your policies, all of your procedures are going to stand the test of time.
Love that. Amazing. Well, we're about at time, so thank you so much for all of your contributions. It's been great talking with you both again, and we'll leave it there.
Super, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, overran.
Pleasure.